So today we'll take a look at the Recurse modules from Venom and why you might want to start using them for sound design. I have a document that I keep on updating with all sorts of tips and tricks with modules in VC so I added also the ideas from this video to this document. It's available on my Patreon together with the patches from this video and more exclusive content. So the basic idea behind the Recurse is utilizing polyphony for creating a processing chain without the need to use multiple modules. Now both modules are identical, just that one is mono and the other one is stereo. Right, so here I have the VCO unit. Let me zoom out a bit. Right, the VCO unit, for now it's going through one wave folder. Right, it will sound like this. It will look like this also here on the scope. Right, but I can add another wave folder. I will just unbypass this one. So now it goes through two wave folders and then another one and another one. Right, so now it goes through four wave folders in serial. Right, it goes to one and then from the second one to the third and so on and so forth. Right, and this is exactly what Recurse will do. So here I have another VCO, right, and I have here the same wave folder and I'm using Recurse in this case. So I will use the send and return ports to connect the wave folder. The send will go to the wave folder and then from the wave folder back to the return. And now again we have just the one wave folder, but I can add another one with the recursion count. Right, so now it goes through two wave folders and you can see it's already polyphonic. So now the wave folder is polyphonic, and this is something important to remember. Whichever module you use, it's important that it will be it's available to be polyphonic. Right, you can see we have here two channels of polyphony. So now again it goes through two wave folders in serial, but again we can have the same result as before. We can take it up to 4. Right, and now we have 4 channels of polyphony, and again because we use polyphony we can go up to 16 channels, which will basically mean in this case up to 16 wave folders. Right, and again the more we use, the more channels of polyphony we will get also. So here I have 3 VCO units. I'm mixing them, right, just to create something a bit more complex. This is already going through Recurse, and again I will use a filter in the send and return. So the send will go, in this case, a low-pass filter, and from the filter it will return to the return input. Right, so now we have this mix of the 3 VCOs going through a low-pass filter. But now again I'm using Recurse, so I can add more copies of this filter. For example, let's go with 6. Right, so now we have 6 filters in serial. And this can get quite crunchy when adding also some drive. But before I do this, we have here the modulation options. This setting will dictate where the scale and offset are in the chain. So for example, by default it's set to be before the first filter, right? So I can scale and offset the signal before it goes to the first filter. The second option here is before each of the filters, in this case, right, before all sends. Then we have after each of the sends, again after each of the filters, or I can have it all the way at the end after the last filter, and this means that basically the scale is now a level control, so I can add drive and then scale it down just so it doesn't get too crazy. Again, now we have tangents, going through tangents like this 6 times. We get something nice and crunchy. Right, I can add also modulation here to the filter. I have here another LFO, add some chorus, add some delay. Right, so we have a nice thick sound. And of course now the filter is polyphonic, so we can also control it polyphonically. Here I have another VCO unit, I'm sequencing it with slips. And I'm using the same setup, right? So again, Recurse, in this case it's set to 4 copies. And again, the filter is in the send and return, but in this case I'm using a bandpass filter instead of a low pass. Right, so again, now we have 4 copies of this filter. We have 4 channels of polyphony, and I can modulate each channel separately. So I have here the mod 7 from Secocell. The last output here, I hope you can see this, it says P, the last output is polyphonic. So if I send this to the filter, and I right click mod 7, I can choose how many channels of polyphony I want. Again, in this case we have 4 channels, so I will select 4. And now each filter gets its own modulation, its own LFO. Right, so we get again something a bit more complex. And another thing we can do is we can also process the polyphonic signal externally. Right, here I have Bassmaster Junior that I'm always using to spread the polyphonic channels in the stereo field. This is going through a phaser and some delay. So I'm just going to get a copy of tangents in this case. Again, for now it's polyphonic with 4 channels. I'm going to take a copy of it, spread it in the stereo field, add some phaser and delay. And we get another layer. I have here another sequence just for fun with another slips and 2 VCO units. Of course, we can also process modulation. I have here an LFO, and I'm using the wave folder in the send and return of Recurse, just like we've seen in the beginning. And the result of this is modulating a low-pass filter. Right, now I can process the LFO with, let's say, 4 copies of the wave folder, right, again by changing the recursion count. So now the LFO is actually going through 4 copies of the wave folder again in serial. And again here, if I zoom in a bit, we have the different modes. So now I can have the scale and offset controlling things before each of the wave folders. Right, if I change this to N pre, it's before each of the wave folders we have now scale and offset. Right, so now I can scale things and offset them. Right, and this will happen before each of the wave folders, of the 4 wave folders, and we get something a bit more complex. Right, we can get also something a bit more repetitive by utilizing the reset input of the LFO, so every clock division of 4. Just to get something a bit more repetitive, I'm going to use a delay here a bit. Ping pong delay from Doc B. Right, so we get a bit more of a complex result. I have some drums here. I have the Rhythm Explorer also from Venom, sequencing the new Octa module or drum module from Nano. And again, I'm using Recurse here. You can see I have 3 channels, and the modules that I'm using are Debriatus from Volt and Bonsai, which is also a distortion from Surge XT. You can see both of them are polyphonic. Right, this is really important. You have to use polyphonic modules, otherwise this will not work. So now I'm processing the drums. Let me unmute this already. I'm processing the drums with 3 copies of this little chain. Right, I have here also a sequence, again slips sequencing the VCO unit. In this case I'm using the stereo recurse. Again, it's exactly like the mono one, just that in this case it's stereo. And I have here another chain. I have bonsai, again the distortion going through a modulated filter, and nimbus, which is a clouds clone, and it's also polyphonic. Right, in the right click menu you can choose polyphonic stereo processing, so this works really nicely with Recurse, and in this case I have 4 copies. So I have 4 copies of this chain, bonsai through filter, through nimbus, again creating something a bit more complex, with a bit more depth. Another fun thing to try is audio rate modulation with the scale and offset, creating interesting ring modulation. I have here a sequence with Cartesia sequencing Aorus, both from the CV Fun collection. Right, I have here also 2 VCO units that I will use for audio rate modulation. Right, so I will use the same sequence. I will send both oscillators the same sequence, just so everything is moving together. And now I can use, for example, the first one to modulate the scale. Right, I will take it a bit down. Right, and the scale again, it's level, so basically now we get ring modulation. Right, and I can start adding more layers to this, basically by adding the count number. Even though I'm not using send and return, still it will create multiple layers of this modulation. So maybe I will go with 6, let's say. And now choose a different mode. Now here, be careful, this can get quite loud really quickly. I have here another level control. I will take it down for a second. And now these 2 modes, the end pre and end post, work really well for ring modulation. So I'm going to take the first one. You can hear it's quite loud. Right, take it down here. But it creates really interesting textures. Right, I can also change the VCO itself. Maybe add some modulation here to the shape. Maybe even make this a triangle wave. Right, I can do the same for the offset. Right, modulate it also at audio rates with the second VCO here. Again, change it a bit. Right, add modulation to the shape. And again, you just have to be careful with the level. I'm not sure if it's a bug or this is how it works, but because we have 6 copies of everything can get quite loud really quickly. Right, but again, you can create interesting textures and interesting sounds like this, even without using the send and return. I have here some drums with the same idea. Right, again, the Rhythm Explorer sequencing Octa from Nano, which is a drum module, a new drum module. And again, this is going, let me solo this for a second. This is going through Recurse, again with 16 channels in this case. Here I am using the send and return with a low pass filter. Right, but I'm using the VCO to modulate the scale. Right, so I'm ring modulating the drums. With a VCO unit. Right. Right, so again, you can create interesting textures like this. Another interesting thing you can try is creating or building your own sort of multi-tap delay. Let me solo this also. I have here slips sequencing the VCO unit. And here with Recurse, again, I'm using the stereo one. I'm using 2 delay modules from Bog Audio. I'm using them because, again, they are polyphonic, which is something you definitely need when using Recurse. So now the more I add, the more copies I add, the more taps we will get, because again, this is working in serial. Right, so if I add 5, right, we get more taps. Can add even more. Right, so you can also explore Recurse with a delay. I have here also a bass with a phrase sequencer sequencing the classic VCO, but before I mute this, that was it for today. I hope you will go and explore some of these ideas. Thank you again for watching. Cheers.